War must be taboo without exception. Instead, the taboo has been lifted yet again to the detriment of the entire world. Without this most basic of taboos in place, thou shalt not murder, there is no longer glue holding humanity together. Every argument used to justify murder against Israelis can be made against almost everyone else in the world. Argument 1, you stole our land, so we get to murder you. Billions of people live on land stolen from native indigenous people. No one accepts indigenous people slaughtering non-native Americans, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, just to name a few places, in order to get their lands back. But the anti-Israel crowd, Jew-hating crowd, makes an exception for murder when it comes to killing Jews in Israel. Many, in an effort to delegitimize Israeli Jews, dismiss or lie about Jews and their thousands of year history and connection to the land of Israel. Archaeology and history are cynically dismissed. Facts are ignored or dismissed by many of these, calling for the murder of Jews in Israel after the existence of Israel as a UN-recognized nation for over 75 years, by using the excuse that Jews are not indigenous or they're not a real people or some other nonsense, so that therefore they are fair game for murder in their Jew-hating, demented eyes. This means applying a standard to Israel alone that is not applied to the multitude of other countries and for billions of other people. Countless millions of people that justify the murder of Jews in Israel for not being native or indigenous or for being occupiers are themselves non-indigenous people living on lands that are or were stolen and are occupied now. The right of return as a justification for murder ignores the ethnic cleansing of the Jews from Arab-majority lands that now makes up Israel's majority population. Not only the ethnic cleansing and theft of lands and lives of Jews that lived in Europe up until the Holocaust. No one grants Jews the right to murder to recover their stolen lands taken from them all over the Middle East, Europe, and North Africa. That fictitious right is granted by Jew haters only to those that seek to murder Jews. Jews were massacred, murdered, persecuted, and driven out from lands all over the Middle East and North Africa, including Iraq, Libya, Egypt, Syria, Yemen, Algeria, Lebanon, and more. Jews were massacred in Hebron in 1929 and in numerous other places in British-controlled Palestine long before Israel was established as a state. These Jews from the Middle East and Africa and their descendants form Israel's majority population. They and the rest of the Jews of Israel are told they are fair game for murder and must be driven out to create yet another Jew-free Arab state. This is what, from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free means. It means genocide. It means that the Arabs, now called Palestinian, have a right to a Jew-free Arab state to replace Israel, according to the anti-Israel crowd, while it is the Jews of Israel that they call apartheid. Even though Israel's Arab population and non-Jewish population are over 20% with full and equal rights, it is tiny democratic Israel that is targeted in a world full of countries run by brutal, cruel, theocratic and political dictatorships where religious and ethnic minorities have no rights. The right of return also ignores the full history of why Arabs fled from Israel in 1948 during a time of war when Israel was attacked from all sides by Arab armies and by Arab forces within Israel itself. Even if the untrue anti-Israel narrative is accepted that all of the Arabs that fled from Israel were driven out, then the question still must be asked. Hundreds of millions of people have been driven from their lands, and no one grants the native people the right to murder those that now occupy the lands that were stolen and taken by force. Why is the right of return as grounds to murder applied only to Israel and nowhere else, despite the fact that hundreds of millions of people have had their lands taken, including Jews, and they do not have that right? Billions of people live on lands occupied, conquered, stolen, and taken by force from native people all over North Africa, the rest of Africa, the Middle East, North America, South America, Australia, New Zealand, Asia, and more. Land stolen, occupied, and colonized not only by Europeans, but also by Arabs and others. Why is murder not accepted as legitimate anywhere in the world except against Israelis, even though there's not a single accusation that can be made against the people of Israel that does not apply to hundreds of millions, even billions of people across the world? Past injustices and grievances do not ever justify murder. Murder is not resistance. The murder, atrocities, and kidnappings Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and others from Gaza committed on October 7th in Israel against thousands of defenseless people, including babies, children, girls, women, and the very old, showed exactly where the lifting of the taboo against murder leads. It leads to horrific suffering. It leads to war. There would be no war now in Gaza, no deaths to children in Gaza from war. Hamas and company wages war from densely populated areas, using children and civilians as human shields to hide behind and beneath. Hamas and company built tunnels beneath ground to protect themselves and not a single bomb shelter above ground, attacking, wounding, kidnapping, mutilating, sexually abusing, murdering thousands of defenseless people inside of Israel on October 7th by Hamas and company led to the very predictable response that war would follow. Hitler was a demented murderer. History shows the mass destruction, mass murdering, millions of other lives lost by war and world war that resulted from his leadership. History keeps repeating itself. Those that condone, justify, support, defend, or support murder, including by the demonic use of denial, bring great harm not only to the defenseless victims of the murderers, but also to the societies of the murderers from the inevitable acts of war that follow mass murder. To be clear, murder and war are not the same. Murder is never justified, whereas war is tragic, horrible, one of the worst things people can do to one another, but it is at times defensible. War is what stopped Hitler. War is what stopped the genocide of Khmer Rouge. It is what stopped the genocide in Rwanda. War is what stopped genocidal ISIS. War is what genocidal Hamas forced upon Israel. It is unfortunate that support for Palestine has more to do about hatred for Jews than concern about the lives of Palestinian Arabs. It is time for murder to stop being defended. It is time to call out the supporters and defenders of murder for the very evil they defend and for their own evil by virtue of their being murderers' defenders.